guys, so my name is Ashley Eggleston. I'm the connector role for our literacy group or literature group. My role is to draw conclusions between the text that we're reading and the outside world, everyday situations, things that people might have experienced that are similar to what is talked about in the texts. So we have two different texts here, and I'm going to start with the shorter one, which was the content area and disciplinary literacy strategies and frameworks. And so if you turn to page 3, in the middle of the page under bullet 2, there is a paragraph that says, for instance, consider a middle school student tasked with writing a narrative in her English class and a lab report in her science class. In both cases, she can read the text aloud to herself, circle overused or general words, and replace them with more precise words. So my first instinct when reading that little thing was, that is an impossible task. If you told a middle school student to just do that, and that those were the only instructions that they were given, that would be virtually impossible for them. They would not understand what is going on. So it just kind of gave a general overview over what content area literacy is and gave some examples of strategies that are used in that literacy. But that is just an example of it would be impossible. And I have been that teacher. Since I'm a first year teacher, I taught as a GTA at MTSU while I was getting my master's. And I have had that experience where I gave students directions that were not detailed enough, or we hadn't taken steps towards doing those activities. And when I released them to do their work or had an expectation of what they needed to complete, then I didn't give them enough direction to how it was supposed to be done. And the result was that either students had a hard time doing it, or they did it not in the correct way, or that sort of thing. So depending on what our content area is doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that we need to be aware of what steps it takes to complete a certain activity in mind and give very specific directions, a lot of practice to work with our students so that everybody knows kind of, what's going on and what they're supposed to do and know how to do and what's required of them. And of course, then if the students aren't understanding how to do things, just because we have a rubric or an answer key or something like that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy to grade their material, their answers, their homework, whatever it is, because our rubric is geared toward them completing it properly when they haven't, and it's not exactly their fault. So that's my first connection is, as a teacher, we need to make sure we're giving very precise directions to our students and give them the tools necessary and help them develop the skills necessary to being successful on that activity. All right, the next little thing that I want to talk about is on page 4 of the same article, the content area article, and it's toward the bottom of the page. The paragraph starts, several studies conducted across multiple content areas have demonstrated that disciplinary literacy instruction can lead to positive outcomes for diverse students on measurements of content knowledge and literacy achievement. So just like we have standards that we expect students to adhere to, this is kind of what we expect educators to know. And being educators, also, at least me personally, I like to know why I'm doing something. If it's going to be beneficial for me, beneficial for the students, the classroom, something like that. I like to know those things when I'm being asked to do something new, because as teachers, we always have a lot of things that they ask us to do, and sometimes we ask why these things are being asked of us. So that is one connection that I wanted to make with that article. Now, all right, so that's it with the first article, the short article, the content area one. Now I'm going to move on to the longer text. And for this one, I don't have a specific page number, But if you guys have read through it, you have seen that there are different sections: history, math, science, and English. And the reason behind that is that these are the main subjects that students will take throughout either middle school, high school, what have you. And it is important to know for each of these sections that they include how each discipline presents their claims or their evidence for their reasoning or their logic when they find their answers, what their texts are, and they might not have a textbook or a novel or something that they have a text that they're pulling their information from. For math, it could be an equation or something like that. And so it's something to think about, because when we think of text, we just think of, something that you read, an article or a book or something like that. But each discipline has their own specific set of texts that they need to know how to deal with the information presented and what to do with it, because everything's written for a reason. And they also give examples of how to use their different strategies with their discipline. So, based off of how they look at text and what information they find important in text, then they have different strategies to go with it. It might be an acronym, it might be a certain type of activity or something to do with students. But this article gives a lot of examples, which might be helpful to some of the other teachers in this class. Um, and also, um, it gives some resources too, some rubrics or some charts or things that you might need for that specific discipline. So this specific section doesn't apply to me directly because I am a foreign language teacher. I teach French, but I didn't know what the other people in this group teach. So I wanted to talk about that, because if you teach science, English, math, or history, then you might be able to look at this and get some ideas on how to specifically look at disciplinary literacy in your content area and be able to teach it to your students. And then the other thing that I want to talk about, kind of linked to what I just said about science and math and English and history, on page 3 of the longer article, there is a section titled Strategies. It's kind of in the middle of the page on the right hand side of page 3, right above mathematics. And right at the top, it says, other subject areas also have unique features, but these 4 disciplines have been the focus of research and curriculum and make up the bulk of coursework that students take to graduate. So this is important for me specifically because since I teach foreign language and I don't teach one of those core subjects, it's good to know that just like these other places have specific texts, specific strategies and skills that they have to develop, I can't, it's not irrelevant to me to read this article, because for foreign language, there are also these strategies and these disciplinary things that I need to worry about. And so that gives me the clue that I need to go and research some more information or find some more text on how to implement those sorts of strategies in helping students become literate in the language that I teach. And then lastly, I want to talk about the very end of the long article on page 16. It talks about professional development a little bit right there at the end. And on page 16, on the left-hand side, at the bottom of paragraph 2, it says, they are taught instead a toolbox of generic strategies applied to all disciplines. And as I was reading through both of these articles, some of those generic strategies came to mind that I learned when I was in high school, that I learned as a teacher, and such. But I had an interesting experience that related to this specifically. I took a PD over the summer that was called Focus Teaching, Language, and Context. And so they didn't have any description of what the PD was or what was going to be covered, but because it talked about language, I assumed that it must be talking about foreign language in context. And so I spent the time to complete this PD, and it wasn't until I got about halfway through that I realized we were talking specifically about English strategies. And I still fulfilled the PD and, stayed for um, the rest of the session. But I was trying to find ways to use that content, or the material that they talked about and the strategies they talked about in foreign language. Because, learning English or learning French, you have novels to read, you have cultural context, you have themes, a lot of the similar stuff. So I thought there might be some things for me to get from it, even though it wasn't about my specific content area. Um, but there were some things that I was able to take away from it, and then there were other things that I was like, there is no way that that would be viable whatsoever, in the foreign language classroom. So there are my examples, connecting the text to real life or real scenarios. And if you guys have any questions or need any clarifications on what I said, just let me know.